My name is Josephine, but please call me Josie. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a land surveyor. It's a strange profession for most, I suppose. A world of invisible lines, historical deeds, and the quiet, stubborn truth of the earth itself. It's a profession I came to love because of my grandfather, a man who believed that the land held our stories, and that to understand the boundaries was to understand our history. I never imagined that my unique skill, the one he taught me to revere, would become the weapon I needed to save our family's legacy from my own family. I never thought my uncle, the man who put me on my first horse and taught me how to read the clouds, would try to sell our family's soul for a handful of silver. He handed me a survey that was a lie, a betrayal written in neat lines and false coordinates, designed to seed the very heart of our ranch to a developer. But what he didn't know, what he'd forgotten, was that in my line of work, the truth is only buried, never erased. And I was about to grab a shovel and dig it all up. The story of how I turned the tables, saved our home, and uncovered a century-old secret that changed everything is one I think you need to hear. Before I reveal how a dusty 150-year-old map brought a modern-day land grab to its knees, I'd love to know where you're watching from. So please drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the very people who should have believed in you the most, go ahead and hit that like button. For those of you who are new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who understand that sometimes you have to be your own hero. Our ranch, Coyote Creek Ranch, wasn't just a piece of property. It was a kingdom of golden grass and ancient, gnarled oaks sprawling across 3,000 acres of Central California foothills. It was a living, breathing member of our family, a place where the scent of sagebrush and damp earth clung to your clothes, and the whisper of the wind through the canyons was the only sound for miles. The heart of it all was Coyote Creek itself, a ribbon of life that flowed year-round, its banks thick with willows and sycamores, its water the lifeblood that kept the pastures green and the cattle fat even in the dry heat of summer. My childhood was measured by that creek. It was where I learned to skip stones, where my father taught me to fish, and where my grandfather, Thomas, would sit with me for hours, tracing the lines of the land with his calloused finger and telling me its stories. He was a surveyor in his own way, though he used his eyes and his memory instead of a theodolite. He'd point to a distant ridge. See that peak, Josie girl? That's the Dragon's Tooth. The sun hits it first every morning. That's our eastern boundary. Never forget it. Or he'd walk me down to the creek, to a spot where a massive granite boulder, worn smooth by eons of water, sat half-submerged. This here is the Old Man's Stone. The original survey, the one that gave us this land, started right here. This stone is our anchor. He spoke of the land as if it had a memory, a will of its own. He passed that reverence on to me, and it felt like the most precious inheritance of all. When my father passed away 10 years ago, the ranch's ownership became complicated. It was split between his estate and his younger brother, my Uncle Robert. My mother, Helen, became the executor of my father's half, but she was a city woman at heart, overwhelmed by the scale of it all. She loved the ranch in an abstract way, but she didn't understand its rhythms or its needs. So, she deferred. She deferred to Rob on everything. He was the man on the ground, the one with the supposed business sense. I helped where I could, managing the herd and the hands, but any major decision, any financial choice went through him. I didn't question it at first. He was family. He was my uncle. I trusted him. That trust was the first line he convinced me to let him cross. I remember one summer afternoon, I must have been 15, and Grandpa was showing me how to read an old plat map. The paper was brittle. The ink faded. He laid it on the hood of his dusty pickup truck. "Look here," he said, his finger tracing a faint line. "This is the original parcel. See how the creek is the line? The man who drew this, he understood. Water is everything. You give up your water, you give up your future." Uncle Rob had pulled up then, laughing. "Still filling her head with old stories, Tom? It's all GPS now. A satellite tells you where the line is. Much easier." Grandpa had just looked at him, a strange, sad expression on his face. "The satellite tells you where the pin is, Rob," he'd said quietly. "It doesn't tell you if the pin is in the right place." At the time, I thought it was just a simple disagreement. Looking back, I see it was a clash of philosophies, a harbinger of the war to come. The war began with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. It was Rob, his voice slick with a forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on edge. "Josie girl, big news. We're having a family meeting tonight at the main house. 7 o'clock. Don't be late. This is a big one." He didn't give me time to ask questions, just hung up, leaving a hum of anxiety in the air. That evening, I walked into the familiar living room of the ranch house. The fire was lit, casting dancing shadows on the stone hearth and the dozens of framed family photos on the mantelpiece, generations of us, smiling out from the past. My mother was sitting on the edge of the floral sofa, wringing her hands, a nervous smile plastered on her face. Uncle Rob was pacing in front of the fireplace, a folder clutched in his hand. He was trying to look like a captain of industry, but a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead betrayed his nerves. He launched into his speech the moment I sat down. He talked about rising costs, the price of feed, the long drought. He painted a picture of a ranch on the brink of collapse, a legacy teetering on a financial knife's edge. It was dramatic, and it was a lie. We'd had a profitable year. But my mother was buying every word, her eyes wide with worry. "But," Rob said, pausing for effect, "I found a lifeline. A way to secure our future, to modernize, to finally get this ranch into the 21st century." He opened the folder and spread a large, glossy map across the heavy oak coffee table. A prominent logo in the corner read, "Sterling Development." Beside it was another document, a survey map from a company called Apex Surveying. I'd never heard of them. "Mr. Sterling is a developer," Rob explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's building a luxury resort community on the old Henderson property next door. And he wants to buy a small piece of our land to expand his golf course. He used a gold pen to trace a line on the Apex survey. He just needs this little sliver right here. A tiny piece, really. And the offer he's made. Helen, Josie, it's life-changing." My eyes weren't on the dollar figure he'd slid across the table. They were on the line. It was a neat, straight, clinical line that sliced off the entire southern bank of Coyote Creek. It didn't meander, it amputated. It cut off the sycamore groves, the best grazing land, and our primary access to the water. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Rob," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "That line, it's not right." He glanced up, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "What do you mean, not right?" I leaned forward, pointing. "The old fence, the one Grandpa always said was the marker, is way further east than that. This map, it takes the whole creek." Rob let out a short, condescending laugh. He patted my hand as if I were a child who'd wandered into a grown-up conversation. "Josie, sweetheart, I know you like to play with your little tapes and measures, but this is the big leagues. These are professionals. Apex uses state-of-the-art equipment. We're talking GPS, laser-guided transits, satellite imaging. This is infinitely more accurate than some rusty old fence put up 100 years ago." The dismissal stung, sharp and humiliating. He wasn't just questioning my knowledge. He was mocking the very legacy he claimed to be saving. He was dismissing our grandfather. My mother, ever the peacemaker, jumped in on his side. "Josephine, please. Your uncle has worked so hard on this. Mr. Sterling's people are experts. Don't cause trouble. Don't cause trouble." It was the mantra of my childhood, the phrase used to silence any opinion that rocked the family boat. For a moment, I almost listened. The weight of their combined expectation was immense. I looked at my mother's pleading face, at my uncle's confident smirk. He even had the gall to bring up my own modest surveying business. "Josie, you handle property lines for suburban houses. A quarter acre here or there. This is a multi-million-dollar deal concerning thousands of acres. It's a different world." He said it with a paternalistic kindness that was more insulting than open hostility. It was designed to make me feel small, inexperienced, and foolish. And in front of my mother, who already worried that my career was too unladylike, it worked. I felt a flush of shame and anger creep up my neck. I wanted to argue, to lay out the principles of surveying, to tell him that the size of the property doesn't change the fundamental truth of a boundary line. But I was outnumbered. I saw the closed-off expression on my mother's face and knew it was useless. I fell silent, the unease in my gut hardening into a cold, heavy stone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that clean, straight line on the map was burned into my mind. It was a violation. Every instinct I had, every lesson my grandfather had ever taught me, screamed that it was wrong. The next morning, before the sun had even crusted the dragon's tooth, I was out in the field. I wasn't playing. I hauled out my professional-grade Trimble R10, the same GPS unit used by the top firms in the country. I had my data collector, my field notes from years of walking this land, and a burning need to prove I wasn't crazy. I started at a known point, a brass geodetic marker set by the county in 1978 on a high point of the ranch. It was an undisputed, legally recorded position. From there, I began to work my way down toward the creek, taking readings, cross-referencing with old aerial photographs, and searching for the ghosts of the past. It took me 2 full days of meticulous work, battling thorny brush and scrambling down rocky slopes. And then I found them, just where I knew they had to be. An old iron pin, nearly swallowed by the roots of a massive oak, its top battered and rusted. Further down, the notched granite stone my grandfather had called the Sentry Rock. These were the original monuments, the physical evidence of the historical boundary. They were exactly where my memory and Grandpa's stories had placed them. I set up my rover on each point, let the satellite signals lock, and recorded the coordinates. Back at my home office, a small cottage on the edge of the ranch, I downloaded the data. I overlaid my points onto the county plat maps. They matched perfectly. Then I overlaid the apex survey. The difference was staggering. Their line was a clean 200 yards west of the true boundary, running parallel to the creek but on our side of it. It wasn't a small discrepancy or a rounding error. It was an 80-acre theft. I printed everything out. The maps, the coordinate data, the comparison overlays. My hands were shaking, partly from exhaustion, partly from adrenaline. This was it. This was the proof. I called Rob and told him I needed to see him immediately. I laid my maps out on the same coffee table where he had presented his deceitful proposal. "Look," I said, my voice tight but controlled. "This is the county marker. These are the historical monuments. My readings confirm them. And this," I jabbed a finger at his map, "is the apex line. It's wrong, Rob. It's demonstrably, provably wrong. They've ignored every single piece of physical evidence on the ground." I expected him to be surprised, maybe even grateful. I thought he'd been duped by the developer. I was naive. His charm didn't just evaporate, it shattered. His face, which could be so warm and avuncular, twisted into a mask of pure fury. "Are you serious?" he spat, his voice low and venomous. "You went behind my back? You're trying to sabotage this? To sabotage your own family." "I'm trying to protect our family." I shot back, shocked by his venom. "They are trying to steal 80 acres of our most valuable land." 80 acres. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We're talking about millions of dollars, Josie. Millions that will save this ranch. A ranch your father, God rest his soul, left in a real mess." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. My father had been a meticulous record keeper and a careful manager. He had loved this land with his whole being. "That's a lie," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "Is it?" Rob leaned in, his eyes blazing. "You have no idea what it takes to keep this place afloat. The debt, the loans. I'm drowning here, trying to hold it all together. This deal with Sterling is our only way out. And you, with your sentimental nonsense about old rocks and rusty fences, are going to ruin it all." He was breathing heavily, his face flushed. For the first time he had mentioned debt. But he framed it so skillfully, wrapping his personal failure in the noble flag of saving the family legacy. He was using guilt as his weapon, and he wielded it with brutal efficiency. "I'm doing this for you," he said, his voice dropping, suddenly filled with a theatrical sorrow. "For your mother. To preserve what your grandfather built. Can't you see that?" He didn't wait for an answer. He stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard that a photo on the mantelpiece rattled in its frame. It was a picture of him and my dad as boys, grinning, arms slung around each other's shoulders. I was left standing in the silence, my irrefutable proof scattered on the table, feeling like the villain in my own story. My mother came in from the kitchen, her face pale. She didn't look at my maps. She only looked at me, her eyes filled with disappointment. "Josephine," she said, her voice trembling. "What have you done? You need to stop this. Just let it go. Let it go." The words echoed in my head for days. I felt utterly alone, trapped between the unyielding truth of the land and the unyielding pressure of my family. I tried to show my mother the documents again, spreading them on the kitchen table, calmly explaining the legal principles, the importance of the monuments. She wouldn't even look at them. "Your uncle is family, Josie," she repeated, as if it were a magic incantation that could bend reality. "Family doesn't try to hurt family. Mr. Sterling is offering so much money. Maybe the old ways were wrong. Maybe your grandfather remembered it wrong." The gaslighting was insidious. She was planting seeds of doubt, making me question my own expertise, my own memory. "You're tearing this family apart over a patch of dirt," she said, her voice breaking. "Is that what you want?" The weight of her grief and Rob's anger was crushing. I retreated to my cottage, the maps and data feeling less like proof and more like a burden. I stared at the numbers on my screen, the crisp lines I had drawn, and for a terrifying moment, I allowed myself to wonder. What if they're right? The thought was a poison. Asterisk, maybe I am wrong. Maybe surveying technology has advanced in some way I don't understand. Maybe I'm just being stubborn, clinging to Grandpa's stories like a child. Asterisk, I actually sat down at my computer and began to draft an email. "Uncle Rob, I've had some time to think." The words felt like ash in my mouth. I couldn't type another one. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding with a mixture of shame and self-loathing. I was letting them win. I was letting them make me doubt the one thing I knew better than anything else. Desperate for a friendly voice, for someone who knew the land's soul, I sought out Elias. He was the oldest hand on the ranch, a man whose skin was as wrinkled and brown as a dried leaf. He'd worked for my grandfather, and then my father, and now me. He was sitting on an overturned bucket by the stables, mending a piece of tack, his movements slow and deliberate. I didn't show him the maps. I just described the developer's proposed line. He stopped his work and squinted at the horizon, his memory mapping the land in a way no satellite could. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "That line they're drawing," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That's horse manure. It's on the wrong side of the Sycamore Flats. Always has been." He pointed with his chin toward the creek. "Your granddaddy, old Tom, he had 100 fights with the Hendersons over that line. But he always won. He'd take them right to the Sentry Rock and the old iron pin, and that was that. End of story. He used to say, 'The water is the blood of this land, Elias. You don't let nobody put a leech on it.' What they're trying to do, it's just plain thievery." His simple, unshakable certainty was the antidote to my mother's poison. It wasn't just my opinion. It was the ranch's living memory. His words were the permission I needed to keep fighting. That afternoon, I picked up the phone and called the one person I knew would understand both the technical and the ethical nightmare I was in. Dr. Anya Sharma had been my favorite professor at university, a brilliant cartographer and a leading expert in historical surveying and land disputes. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had a deep-seated respect for the history of the profession. I explained the entire situation, my voice cracking with the strain of the past week. She listened patiently, without interruption. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line. Then, her voice came through, calm and validating as a bedrock monument. "Josephine, listen to me. Trust your training. Trust your data. And above all, trust your gut. A modern survey is only as good as its point of commencement. If their starting point is fraudulent, the entire survey is fraudulent. You're looking at the symptoms. You need to find the disease. You need to go back to the beginning. The very beginning. Go to the county archives and find the original patent." The next morning, I drove the 2 hours to the county seat. The records office was in the basement of the old courthouse, a dreary, fluorescent-lit space that smelled of decaying paper, dust, and stale coffee. I approached the front counter, where a world-weary clerk with a formidable beehive hairdo looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked, in a tone that suggested she sincerely hoped she could not. I explained what I was looking for, the plat maps and deeds for our parcel and the neighboring one, going back as far as they had. She sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of suffering. Those old records are in the deep archive. They're not digitized. You'll have to look for them manually. She led me through a heavy steel door into a cavernous, dimly lit room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves. It was a library of forgotten history, crammed with enormous, leather-bound ledgers and dusty boxes tied with string. It's all sorted by year and section, she said, waving a dismissive hand at the chaos before disappearing back into her fluorescent sanctuary. For hours, I pulled down the heavy volumes, my hands growing gray with a century's worth of dust. I started with the most recent records and worked my way back in time. The 1978 county survey, the 1952 plat, a hand-drawn map from 1921. Each one corroborated my findings. Each one showed the boundary following the creek, using the same monuments I had found. The evidence was piling up, but it still didn't answer the fundamental question. On what basis did Apex Surveying create their map? They couldn't have just invented a line out of thin air. They needed a legal justification, however flimsy. Dr. Sharma's voice echoed in my head. Go back to the beginning. I went back to the clerk. I need to see the original land patent files, I said. From the 1800s. She gave me a look of profound pity. Honey, some of those are so fragile they fall apart if you look at them too hard. But knock yourself out. She pointed me to a forgotten corner of the archive, to a set of flat file drawers that looked like they hadn't been opened since the Harding administration. The search became an obsession. I pulled open drawer after heavy drawer, the screech of metal on metal echoing in the silent room. I carefully sifted through brittle, yellowed documents, the ornate, looping script of the 19th century a challenge to decipher. My back ached, my eyes burned from the dim light and the dust that seemed to coat everything, even the air I breathed. There were moments of pure despair when I thought it was a fool's errand, that the document was lost to time, eaten by silverfish or destroyed in a long-forgotten courthouse fire. And then, in a dusty folio at the bottom of the last drawer, I found it. The file for our parcel. And inside, protected by a sheet of heavy paper, was the original 1888 land grant for the Coyote Creek Ranch, issued to my great-great-grandfather, Caleb Walker. It was a work of art. A hand-drawn map on vellum. The lines drawn with a draftsman's perfect precision. The script a beautiful, flowing calligraphy. I spread it carefully on a large, clear table, my heart pounding. And I read the legal description, the metes and bounds that gave birth to our ranch. It began at a specific point on the county line, then described each turn and boundary until it reached the final, crucial call. Thence north 20 degrees west for 80 chains to a large granite boulder at the mouth of Coyote Creek, thence following the meanderings of said creek to the point of beginning. Thence following the meanderings of said creek, the words sang out to me from across the century. The creek itself was the boundary. Not a line near it, not a line that straightened its curves. The water's edge. The Apex Survey, with its clean, straight line, wasn't just an error. It was a fundamental contradiction of the document that created the property in the first place. It was legally indefensible. A wave of triumphant relief washed over me. This was the silver bullet. This was the end of the argument. But my work wasn't done. Something still nagged at me. Why would a developer risk so much on such a blatant fraud? It felt too brazen. Curiosity, now sharpened by suspicion, took over. I went back to the archives and pulled the original patent for the adjoining parcel, the one the developer, Sterling, now owned through a series of corporate acquisitions. I laid the two vellum maps side by side. I traced our boundary along the creek. Then I traced theirs. My blood went cold. My breath hitched in my throat. The boundary of the Henderson parcel, now Sterling's land, was described with equal clarity, thence running west to the eastern ridge of the Sycamore Flats. The eastern ridge. Not the creek. Not the fence line that had stood for as long as anyone could remember. The fence line, the one everyone had accepted as the boundary for decades, was a full quarter-mile west of that ridge. The neighboring property had been encroaching on our ranch for generations. It wasn't a matter of a few feet. I did a quick, rough calculation in my head, my surveyor's mind automatically estimating the area. It was hundreds of acres. Hundreds of acres of prime grazing land. The full, horrifying picture snapped into focus with sickening clarity. The fraudulent survey from Apex wasn't just an attempt to steal our creek. It was a smokescreen. It was a calculated, audacious move to formalize their claim on the land they had been trespassing on for a century and to grab the water rights in the process. This wasn't a simple land purchase. It was a massive, historical cover-up. And my uncle, he wasn't just a pawn. He had to be a willing accomplice. The size of Sterling's offer suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't just buying 80 acres. They were buying my family's silence. They were paying to erase a century of theft. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more profound than I could ever have imagined. My uncle wasn't just selling off a piece of our future. He was trying to help them steal our past. I drove back to the ranch in a state of cold, focused rage. The hurt and self-doubt were gone, burned away and replaced by a core of steel. I was no longer just defending the land. I was on the attack. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer, a sharp land use specialist from the city. The second was to call a meeting. Not a family meeting in front of the fireplace. A formal, professional meeting. I booked the conference room at the small hotel in town for the following week. I sent a formal email with my new lawyer CC'd, inviting Uncle Rob, my mother, Mr. Sterling, and any legal counsel he wished to bring. The subject line was simple: resolution of boundary dispute regarding Coyote Creek Ranch. The day of the meeting, I walked in feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. I wore a tailored blazer and had my hair pulled back. I was no longer the dusty, emotional niece. I was Josephine Walker, a professional land surveyor with an airtight case. I had also invited Dr. Sharma, who sat beside me, her presence a quiet bastion of academic authority. My lawyer was present via a large video screen we had set up. Rob and Sterling arrived together, exuding an air of smug confidence. They clearly saw this as my final, desperate gambit before a forced surrender. Rob avoided my eyes, giving my mother a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Mr. Sterling, a man with a perpetually tanned face and cold, reptilian eyes, gave me a dismissive nod. His lawyer, a slick-looking man in a pinstripe suit, set his briefcase on the table with a decisive thud. Rob tried to take control immediately. "All right, Josie, let's get this over with," he said, his tone one of weary indulgence. "Mr. Sterling is a very busy man." I let the comment hang in the air for a moment before I stood up and walked to the front of the room, where a large projector screen waited. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice even and steady. "I promise I won't take up too much of your time. We are here, as you know, to discuss the proposed sale of a parcel of land along Coyote Creek, based on a survey provided to my family by Apex Surveying." I clicked a button on my laptop, and the glossy Apex map appeared on the screen, its fraudulent lines slicing through our land. "This is the survey in question." I clicked again. My own GPS-verified survey appeared next to it, the discrepancy highlighted in a stark, angry red. "And this is my survey, which I believe you've seen, showing a significant conflict with the established historical monuments." Sterling's lawyer, whose name was Pratt, let out a condescending sigh. "Miss Walker," he said, not bothering to hide his disdain, "a disagreement between two surveyors is hardly news. We can litigate this for years. The discovery process alone will cost your family a fortune. It is, and I say this for your own benefit, in your absolute best interest to accept our client's very generous offer and put this matter to rest." He smiled, a thin, humorless expression. He thought he had me cornered, that the threat of legal fees would be enough to make me fold. I gave him a small, faint smile of my own. "Ordinarily, Mr. Pratt, you might be right. But this isn't a disagreement about the interpretation of data. It's a matter of historical fact." I clicked the remote again. The two modern maps vanished, replaced by a high-resolution, crystal-clear scan of the 1888 land grant. The beautiful, hand-drawn map filled the screen, its calligraphic script silencing the room. You could feel the air change, the modern sterile confidence of the room suddenly confronted with the raw, undeniable weight of history. I picked up a laser pointer, and its red dot danced on the vellum. I read the legal description aloud. my voice ringing with the authority of the truth. Thence north 20 degrees west for 80 chains to a large granite boulder at the mouth of Coyote Creek, thence following the meanderings of said creek to the point of beginning. I turned off the laser pointer and looked directly at Mr. Sterling. The creek, Mr. Sterling, is the boundary. Your survey manufactures an arbitrary straight line for the sole purpose of severing our access to water and annexing our land. This document, the foundational title deed for my family's ranch, proves that your survey is not just incorrect. It is fraudulent. A stunned silence fell over the room. My mother stared at the screen, her eyes wide. Uncle Rob began to sputter. That's just some old piece of paper. It's ancient history. It's meaningless. On the contrary, Dr. Sharma interjected, her voice cutting through Rob's panic like a diamond through glass. In property law, the original patent holds what is known as senior right. It is the source document from which all subsequent deeds and titles for that land derive their legitimacy. It is, legally speaking, everything. Rob's face went pale. Sterling's jaw was tight, the tan on his face seeming to fade. But I wasn't finished. I let the weight of Dr. Sharma's words settle for a long moment. Then I turned my gaze back to Sterling. But I do have to thank you, Mr. Sterling. Your brazen attempt to defraud my family is what prompted me to look a little deeper into the history of our properties. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen changed to a final, devastating image. It was a modern satellite map overlaid with the outlines of both original land grants. The area of our ranch was shaded green. The original area of his property was shaded blue. And in between them was a massive swath of land, highlighted in a shocking, brilliant red. This blue area shows your property's original boundary, as defined in your own 1888 patent, terminating at the eastern ridge of the Sycamore Flats. I explained, my voice as cold and hard as iron. And this line, I traced the long-standing fence line, is where your property has been operating for the better part of a century. The area in red, which my preliminary calculations put at approximately 420 acres, is land you have been illegally occupying, using, and profiting from for decades. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the projector's fan. Sterling's face, once a mask of cold power, had collapsed. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, the ghost of a century of theft rising up to condemn him. Pratt, his lawyer, was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, the color drained from his face. He was speechless. My Uncle Rob looked like he was going to be physically sick. He sank back in his chair, his eyes wide with terror, finally understanding the true depth of the pit he had dug for himself. My mother, who had been watching me with a look of dawning horror, slowly turned her head to stare at her brother-in-law, a silent, devastating accusation in her eyes. I let my gaze sweep across their shattered faces before delivering the final blow. I picked up a file folder from the table and placed it squarely in front of Mr. Sterling. So, gentlemen, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, resolute tone. We are no longer discussing the sale of our land. We are now discussing the terms of a new boundary agreement and the payment of back rent, water usage fees, and mineral rights compensation for your decades of trespassing. My lawyer has drawn up a preliminary estimate of what your company owes my family. We can discuss it now, or we can discuss it in court, alongside formal charges of conspiracy to commit survey fraud. Sterling and Pratt exchanged a panicked look. Without a word, Pratt snatched the folder, opened it, and his face went another shade paler. He leaned over and whispered frantically into his client's ear. Sterling just nodded, his eyes still fixed on me, filled not with anger, but with the flat, dead look of utter defeat. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Sterling's company, faced with irrefutable evidence and the threat of a massive public lawsuit that would expose their fraudulent practices, didn't even try to fight. Their legal team capitulated completely. Within 2 weeks, we had a signed settlement. It wasn't just a victory, it was a rout. They paid a sum of money that was staggering, a figure that not only erased the fictional debt my uncle had invented, but secured the ranch's financial future for generations to come. They formally relinquished all claims to the land they had been occupying, and a new, legally binding boundary agreement was filed with the county, based on my survey and the original historical grants. The infamous Apex surveying firm, a shell company likely created for just such fraudulent jobs, dissolved and vanished overnight. The most satisfying moment for me wasn't signing the papers in a lawyer's office. It was the day the fencing crew arrived. I personally supervised the work, walking the new line with the crew foreman. We pulled up the old crooked fence posts and drove in new ones along the true boundary, the one marked by the eastern ridge of the Sycamore Flats. Elias was there with me, a huge gap-toothed grin stretching across his weathered face. He leaned on a new post, looking out over the hundreds of acres of reclaimed pasture land. "Told ya, Josie girl," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "The land remembers. You just gotta be quiet enough to listen to it." Standing there with the smell of fresh-turned earth in the air and the land of my ancestors restored, I felt a peace that was deeper than any bank deposit. It was the peace of justice. A few days after the settlement was finalized, a pickup truck I recognized pulled slowly up the long drive to my cottage. It was Uncle Rob. He got out of the truck and stood by the door for a long time, as if gathering the courage to knock. He looked smaller, diminished, the swagger and charm stripped away, leaving behind a tired, broken old man. I opened the door before he could knock. I just waited. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his boots, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I came to apologize, Josie," he mumbled, his voice thick. He finally looked up, and I was shocked to see his eyes were filled with tears. He proceeded to confess everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of shame. It started with a few bad investments years ago. Then he started gambling, trying to win it back, digging himself deeper and deeper into a hole. He'd taken out secret loans against his share of the ranch. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. Sterling's people had found out about his debt. They'd approached him. The deal was diabolical in its simplicity. They would wipe his personal slate clean and give him a 7-figure kickback if he could deliver the ranch's land and water, no questions asked. He was selling out his family, our shared history, to save his own skin. "I was so scared, Josie," he choked out, tears now streaming down his face. "I was desperate. I never thought you'd figure it out. I always just saw you as little Josie. I underestimated you. I am so sorry." He sobbed, a racking, painful sound. I listened to it all, the whole pathetic, selfish story, and I felt not hatred, not even anger anymore. Just a profound, weary pity. His apology was a raw, desperate thing. But was he truly sorry for the betrayal, or just sorry that he had been caught? I knew that was a question the audience in my own head would debate for years. When he was finished, I didn't yell. I didn't lecture him. I had already won the war. There was no need to humiliate the defeated. I just laid down the new reality, the new boundary that he had forced me to draw. "I accept your apology, Rob," I said, and I meant it. "For the sake of my father and for the memory of Grandpa, I do. But things have changed. You no longer have any say in the operations of this ranch. Your share will be bought out at a fair market price, using the funds from the settlement. The lawyers will handle the details. You are my uncle, and you will always be welcome at Christmas and Thanksgiving for the sake of this family. But as a business partner, as a steward of this land, that part of our lives is over. Forever." My voice was quiet, but it was absolute. It was a line drawn not on a map, but in the heart of our family. He simply nodded, the tears still tracking through the dust on his cheeks. He understood. He had lost more than just money. He had lost his place in the kingdom he had tried to sell. He got back in his truck and drove away, and I knew I was finally truly in charge of my own home. A year passed. The ranch, infused with the capital from the settlement and guided by a clear, unified vision, thrived in a way it hadn't for decades. I didn't just bank the money. I reinvested it in the land. We upgraded the irrigation systems to be more efficient, using far less water. I worked with a local conservation group to begin a major restoration project along Coyote Creek, reinforcing the banks and replanting native species to create a thriving riparian habitat. The willows and sycamores grew thick and green, and the water ran clearer than I'd ever seen it. In honor of the man who had taught me everything, I used a portion of the funds to establish the Thomas Walker Educational Trust, a nonprofit dedicated to teaching young people about land stewardship, conservation, and the history of our region. The ranch was no longer just a cattle operation. It had a new purpose. It was a place of learning, a living testament to the idea that protecting our heritage and building a sustainable future could go hand in hand. My relationship with my mother underwent its own quiet restoration. The scales had fallen from her eyes. She saw me now not as her difficult, headstrong daughter, but as the capable, clear-eyed leader of our family. She found a new purpose of her own, handling the bookkeeping and scheduling for the educational trust. For the first time, she was a true partner, her practicality and my vision working in harmony. The final test of my new reality came about 6 months after the settlement. Uncle Rob called me, his voice hesitant. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, he got to the point. He had a small business idea. A friend of his wanted to lease a tiny corner of the ranch, way up in the hills, to put up a cell phone tower. The money was good, he said, and we wouldn't even know it was there. A year ago, the suggestion would have sent me into a spiral of anger and anxiety. Now, I felt nothing but a calm resolve. "Rob," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I appreciate you thinking of the ranch. But we're not leasing any part of it for commercial development. That's not the direction we're going in anymore." The answer is no. There was a pause. "Oh," he said, his voice small. "Okay, I understand." There was no argument, no manipulation, no attempt to guilt me. He accepted the boundary. It was a small moment, but it was proof that the change was real and that my newfound strength was permanent. I often walk the land now, my boots kicking up the familiar dust, the scent of sage in the air. I walk down to the creek and put my hand on the old man's stone, its surface cool and solid beneath my palm. I am at peace here, a peace born not of ownership, but of guardianship. I found my power not in fighting, but in seeking the truth. I no longer need anyone's approval to know my own worth. My value is written in the land itself, in every restored acre, in every child who learns the name of the trees, in every drop of clear water that flows down Coyote Creek. My uncle thought the land was just dirt, a commodity to be carved up and sold to the highest bidder. He forgot that a legacy isn't about what you own. It's about what you protect. He underestimated me, that much is certain. But his real mistake was underestimating the truth itself. The truth has a way of staying put, you see. It's patient. It gets written down in dusty ledgers and carved into stone markers and etched into the very course of a creek bed, and it waits. It waits for someone to come along who is willing to listen to its story. They say that blood is thicker than water. But what I learned is that integrity is thicker than blood. Character is thicker than blood. And sometimes the family you choose, the wise mentors who guide you, the old, loyal friends who believe in you, the very earth beneath your feet, are the ones who truly have your back when it matters most. I saved our ranch, but in the process, I found something far more valuable. I found myself. And that's a piece of land that no one can ever take away from me. So what do you think? Was my uncle's apology genuine? Or was he just sorry he got caught? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to hear different perspectives. And please, if you have a story about a time you had to fight for what was right, even when it was hard, I would be honored if you shared it. Your stories give strength to all of us. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more stories from our community. Thank you so much for joining me today, for listening to my journey. I hope my story inspires you to always trust your instincts and to never, ever let anyone make you doubt the truth you hold in your heart. I wish you all strength and peace.